How bad is the current situation with childhood obesity around New Zealand?
Well, I mean, it's got to the stage now where there are, if you add together overweight and obesity, you've got an enormous proportion of young people who actually qualify as being overweight or obese. So, to describe the problem as an epidemic is not an exaggeration. I mean, we've actually got an epidemic of obesity, and the real problem is that this goes on to obesity in adult life, and there are all the problems that go with obesity. I mean, there's diabetes is the most obvious example.
Do you think targeting children with diabetes and obesity will effectively send a message to families that encourage or aren't aware of how much sugar they're consuming?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we are really talking about, in terms of the government proposals of targeting children with obesity. And I think this is a highly debatable issue. I mean, you would have heard the Children's Commissioner yesterday saying that he was really concerned about targeting kids, especially if the attempts to reduce obesity didn't work, the feeling of guilt and everything that goes with it. So while I think it is, there is a case to be made for trying to help children who are already obese, I think the critical thing for me is that one needs to be doing something to, A, prevent the situation from arising in the first place. So we've got to create an environment where obesity is less likely to happen. And then, secondly, we've got to try and make sure that people don't feel guilty about it. So the priority for me is having that environment where obesity is less likely to happen, and also that is the same kind of environment where it's easier to make healthy food choices. So the government seems to be going out of their way to do things to create opportunities for physical activity, and that's important. But actually, what you eat is even more important than physical activity in terms of doing something about this epidemic of obesity. So really, what we need to be doing, in addition to all those things the government is talking about, is we need to be doing something about creating a healthy environment in schools. We need to stop schools from serving unhealthy meals. We need to stop all government institutions from having an unhealthy food environment, and that includes hospitals. We need to do something about advertising. The marketing of unhealthy foods is just unbelievable. We can't counter that. Government's doing something good about food labeling, that's good, but food labeling needs to be compulsory if it's going to be of any use. And then, of course, a lot of people are pushing very hard something the government has rejected out of hand, which is taxing inappropriate foods such as sugary containing foods, sugar-containing foods. So, personally, I have stopped arguing about the sugar tax because the government's made it clear that they're not going to do anything about it. I would be delighted to see it, but I'm campaigning at the moment for reintroduction of appropriate food policies in schools, which creates good messages for the whole community, and clearly we've got to do something about this advertising. While all our sports heroes seem to be, supported by Coca-Cola and other things, we've got a real problem. I think, obviously you've got to have good nutrition in families, so you've got to, encourage families to eat healthily. But I think, and this is one of the cornerstones of the World Health Organization policies to deal with childhood obesity. There are three cornerstones to the WHO policy, and one of the cornerstones is really to do good things in schools. And because if the message gets through schools, it then gets conveyed to the community. And we've got examples in New Zealand of schools that really have done something about good nutrition policies that have, I won't say eliminated obesity, but there's a Decile 1 or Decile 2 primary school in Hamilton that has actually introduced and has maintained these healthy eating policies in schools. They've got hardly any overweight and obese children. They take the good messages home to their families. They don't bring junk food. They're not allowed to bring junk food into schools. The school's meals are good, healthy food. They've got gardens, they grow fruit and vegetables. So I think creating that environment in schools is absolutely pivotal, and it's not just me that thinks that. WHO thinks it's pivotal too. I don't think it's voluntary. I think it's got to be made compulsory, because it's just too difficult if it's voluntary. And I can give you a very good personal example. I was involved many years ago in introducing food policies in schools in the neck of the woods in which I work, in Otago. And this was done as part of a big research project. And children were not allowed to bring junk food in their lunch boxes. They were not allowed to bring sugary drinks in their lunch boxes. There were tremendous protests. How can you tell kids what they should do? It's, personal liberties and all the rest of it. The opposition lasted for about a month or so, and everybody just got used to it after a month. And in fact, when we went back to the parents, a couple of years later, then there were no more problems. They said, "Oh, no, they'd forgotten that there was a problem." So, I think if you say that it's voluntary, it just makes the decisions too difficult. And, the complaints when people come up with and they say, "Oh, that's nanny state, we can't have this nanny state kind of thing of telling kids what they should do in schools," that's just nonsense, because we've got a lot of nanny state stuff. We tell people they've got to wear seatbelts. We tell people that they've got to wear helmets if they cycle or go on motorbikes. We tell people that they can't smoke in public places. Telling people at government-sponsored institutions, whether it's a school or a hospital or anywhere else, that we're going to serve healthy food is no more nanny state than saying you've got to wear a seatbelt.
Just to put this into perspective, how recent has obesity at this level been such an issue?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question. It has increased exponentially over the last 15 or so years. The big increase seems to have occurred sort of towards the end of the last century. The 1990s, it seems to have increased exponentially. And, what has increased exponentially is the increased availability of junk foods. And, the number of food outlets that provide high-fat, high-sugar foods, the availability of high-fat, high-sugar foods has really happened. In Dunedin, I think the first McDonald's, and I'm not particularly getting at McDonald's, but the first McDonald's appeared in 1988, if I remember correctly, towards the end of the 1980s. And it's not just McDonald's. I'm giving you an example.
Yes.
So it's been a phenomenon. Of course, there's always been overweight and obese people, but the epidemic has really occurred in the last 15, 20 years.